Okay. All right. So welcome everyone. We're here to talk about monarch butterflies today and what we can do for them. And my name is Dr. Coby Klein. I'm an ecologist. I teach ecology and evolution at a couple of area institutions of higher learning. And I've recently just totally fallen in love with monarchs. I always liked monarchs a lot, but there's just there are so many interesting features of their lives that I've learned about recently, and so many unanswered questions, and that's going to be a theme for today. It's just going to be all the mysteries. As much as we know about monarch butterflies, there are so many things we don't know, and that's really what gets me going. It's mysteries, ecological mysteries. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. We're going to talk about their conservation status and the threats that they face. And we're also going to talk about their host plant, because we can't talk about their life cycle and the threats that they face without talking about milkweed plants. So we're going to talk all about that. And at the end, you'll be able to claim your own set of milkweed seeds here if you want to plant them. So here's a range map of the monarch butterfly. You can see that they occupy pretty much the entire continental United States, southern part of Canada, which is actually where all the people live, as well as Mexico, the Caribbean, Central America, and into the northern part of South America also. This range map actually is a little bit controversial because it assumes that all of the monarchs in this part of the world, actually all the monarchs found in all the parts covered by orange here, make up a single species. But there's actually good reason to believe, based on DNA, that there are really three separate species of monarchs in North America. There's the one that occupies all of the United States and parts of Mexico. And that's the species we're familiar with. That's the ones we find in our backyards. That's Danaus plexippus. There's also a separate species that lives in parts of the Caribbean. That's referred to by some people as the Jamaican monarch. That's called Danaus cleophilae. And then there's a third monarch species that has been proposed that lives in parts of Central America and the northern part of South America, and that's Danaus eripus. But I've been holding out on you guys a little bit because this isn't the whole range of monarchs. They're also found all the way in the Western Pacific. How did they get there? It's actually one of the great mysteries of monarch butterflies. Somehow they spread to the Western Pacific. They were first spotted in Hawaii in the 1840s. And then by the 1870s, they'd already reached Australia and New Zealand. And that is 30 years to get more than halfway across the Pacific Ocean, and traveling over open ocean for most of that time. That is an incredible expansion of their range. And it's really not clear how they got there. There are a few different explanations. They're all likely, but I don't know exactly which is the most likely. Probably the most likely thing is that they were transported accidentally on boats across the ocean. People were shipping plants from the mainland to Hawaii and then to other parts of the Pacific, and they happened to pick up some monarch caterpillars or monarch chrysalises and unknowingly introduce them into those other parts of the world. It's also possible that because monarchs are migratory, that some monarchs that were migrating got blown out to sea. They found a boat, landed on it, and that boat traveled the rest of the way. A third possibility is that monarchs, being migratory, got blown out to sea during their migration, kept flying until they reached land. And that first land that they got to was Hawaii. And then the same thing happened with Hawaiian monarchs, and got blown out to sea, kept flying until they reached land. And that could have been, this is Hawaii right here. right? So they got to Hawaii and then all the way down into the South Pacific. And now they're all over. They're in Papua New Guinea, they're in Indonesia and Malaysia, Philippines, even Taiwan. And they didn't just go west. You can actually kind of see a little bit that there's some populations here in the Azores and the Canary Islands. And I even saw an even more recent range map that showed some of them actually have ended up in Portugal. Right. So again, not clear how they got there. Maybe they got blown out to sea and just kept flying because they're capable of very long distance flight. So the life cycle of a monarch is very similar to the life cycles of pretty much all butterflies and moths and a lot of other insects. They lead what's called a holometabolous life cycle, which means that they undergo a complete metamorphosis. And it's very clear that caterpillars look nothing like little butterflies, but they have to completely transform themselves before they reach the adult cycle or adult stage. And they go through 4 life stages during their lives: the egg, the larva or the caterpillar stage if you're a butterfly, the pupa, and the adult. So this is what a monarch egg looks like. Monarchs lay 1 egg at a time, the females do, on the underside of a milkweed leaf, and then they move on. And they lay a whole bunch of other eggs. And if you wanted to know what females look like when they're laying eggs, just watch very carefully here. You can see the female fluttering along. She just took off from milkweed where she had laid an egg, and she's looking for more leaves to lay eggs under. All right, so this is in my garden a couple of years ago. I planted some milkweeds, and I was successful in attracting monarchs beyond my wildest imagination. Actually, that's a sunflower. That's just where the video ended. But each egg is formed inside the female prior to fertilization, and that includes the outer shell called the chorion, which protects the developing larva inside. The shell is lined with a layer of wax, which helps keep the egg from drying out. And we don't really know very well how many eggs a female monarch can lay in her lifetime. The adults only live for maybe a month or 2 at a time. But based on studies of captive butterflies, the best estimate is that a female will lay anywhere between 300 and 500 eggs in her 2 months of life. There was one captive female who set the world record by laying 1,179 eggs in her lifetime. Pretty amazing. The eggs remain in the egg stage. You know, between laying and hatching can be anywhere between 3 and 5 days, depending upon the temperature, and then they hatch into little tiny caterpillars. This is a very, very, very young monarch caterpillar on a milkweed plant. And the caterpillars are milkweed munching machines. They start out very small and pale like this one, and they eat and they eat and they eat and they grow and they grow and they grow until they look something like this, where they start developing those bright colors. And eventually they keep eating and keep growing, and then they look like this. They could be, 4 or 5 inches long, maybe not 5, but a good 4 inches long, very fat and juicy looking. Actually, monarch caterpillars go through 5 stages of growth. Those stages are called instars, and each stage, the beginning and end of each stage, involves the monarch caterpillar shedding its exoskeleton and growing another larger one underneath. So how come you never find that molted caterpillar skin anywhere? What happens to it? Not the birds. Caterpillars eat it. They eat their own molted exoskeleton. They're trying to replenish their nutrients. And the exoskeleton is all protein. So they're just trying to replenish their protein. Each Each instar stage lasts about 3 to 5 days, depending on weather conditions and food availability. Now, there are a few interesting features about monarch caterpillars. You see these things here that look like legs. They're not legs. They're called prolegs. They're not used for walking. All monarchs being insects, they have 3 pairs of legs, and they're all in the front of the body here. You can kind of see a couple of them right there. The prolegs aren't used for walking, they're used for gripping. So they use those prolegs to hang on to the leaves and hang on to the stems of the milkweeds while they're feeding. Also notice they have what appears to be 2 pairs of antennae. Now, again, being insects, they should only have 1 pair of antennae. So how is it that they have 2? Well, it turns out that only this one here by the head is really a pair of antennae. Down here, these are false antennae. They may have some kind of sensory function to them, but really they're there to fool birds because, birds like to have the element of surprise when they're grabbing a caterpillar. If the caterpillar sees them coming, they can drop off the leaf and fall to the ground, and then the bird can't get at them very easily. That extra pair of antennae at the back makes the bird unsure which end is the head, so it doesn't know from which direction to attack. So it might hesitate for a second, giving the caterpillar a chance to give it the slip, or they might just not do it at all, and they might say, all right, if I can't get the element of surprise, I'm just going to find something else. The bird wants to attack from behind. They want to attack from behind, so, exactly. Eventually, after the 5th instar stage, they're going to reach a point where they can't get any bigger and they can't get any fatter. And that's when they decide it's time to pupate. You have a question? Do monarch caterpillars only eat milkweed? They only eat members of the milkweed family. There are lots of different species of milkweed, but they will only eat milkweeds, nothing else. There are some other caterpillars that look like that. Black swallowtails, for example, are pretty similar. They eat things in the carrot family. So they'll eat carrots and parsley and dill and things like that. But this is a monarch caterpillar that's about to spin its chrysalis. And you can see that there are a couple of strands of silk starting to hang down. They, when they decide it's time to pupate, the caterpillar will leave the milkweed plant and go for a little walk and look for a suitable plant on which it can spin its chrysalis. So they don't want to make their pupae on the milkweed plants because usually there are a lot of other caterpillars that are munching on those plants. And you spin a cocoon on the leaf, and then some other caterpillars come and eat the leaf. Well, that's no good. So they want to find a nice sheltered spot that's out of the way, not on a milkweed. How exactly they choose their locations and their plants for making their pupae, another one of the monarch mysteries. But generally they want to be hidden from view, some distance away from the food plant. And when it chooses that good spot, it curls up and starts making its cocoon. So during the pupa stage, the transformation to adult is completed in about anywhere between 9 to 15 days, depending on temperatures, basically. And the ecology of monarch pupae is unfortunately very poorly understood because we can't see inside the pupa. And if we open it up, we're going to kill the butterfly inside. So it's really, really difficult to study monarch pupae. It is 2.5, 3 inches long, something like that. Not very big. And the green color provides camouflage, obviously, against the leaves, so it's harder for predators to find them. And there are many important questions on how larvae choose their sites for pupation, how far they're willing to travel to find a good spot, what habitat characteristics are important for promoting survival of the pupating butterfly, and how mortality is different during the different life stages. All a big mystery. Questions that remain to be answered about monarch butterflies. But eventually, after anywhere from 9 to 15 days, that green color is going to disappear and it's going to turn transparent. And you can actually see the monarch butterfly pupating inside. You can see that it's almost ready to emerge. And that's what happens after it emerges. That's what it looks like. So once they emerge as adults, their primary job is now reproduction. That is their main focus. They want to mate and lay eggs and foster the next generation. So monarchs will mate after about anywhere between 3 and 8 days after they emerge. And when they mate, they remain together from basically late afternoon into the early morning, potentially up to 16 hours. Kind of sweet. Females begin laying eggs immediately after they first mate, and both sexes will mate several times during their adult lives. And adults in the summer generations live anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks. So it's a really short life cycle. Yeah. I'm very glad that you asked. In fact, you can tell the difference between males and females pretty easily if you can see them with their wings open. Males have a black spot on the vein on each hind wing. Females don't have that black spot. So this is clearly an adult male.
On the eastern butterfly, perhaps can you tell the difference between the boy and the girl with that?
You mean the black swallowtails? You can. Their color patterns are different. Males have more yellow on them. Females are basically just kind of black and a little bit of blue. Males have a lot more yellow. Yeah. So the spots are made of specialized scales which produce courtship chemicals that help them attract females. So the ends of the abdomen are also shaped differently. The males, I think, are a little bit more tapered, and the females are a little bit wider, I think. Females also usually look a little bit darker, although it can be hard to tell unless you see them side by side. And the females also have wider veins on the wings. These are the veins right here. And females' wing veins are a little bit wider. So like many different like birds, many different insect species are migratory. Potato leafhoppers, for example, spread northward every spring. Dragonflies migrate long distances at the end of the summer. They fly south, just like birds. Convergent lady beetles migrate from higher elevations in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California during the winter down into the Central Valley in California in the spring. And a neat little story about that I came across a few years ago, where this mysterious cloud showed up on weather satellites or weather radar in California, and they didn't know what it was, so they put some people in the field to try to figure it out, and it turns out it was a cloud of ladybugs migrating. So imagine just how many ladybugs there had to have been for that to show up on weather radar. Ladybugs, really small. Convergent lady beetles are one of the smaller species of ladybugs. And yet there were so many of them, they showed up on radar. Many butterflies also migrate. For example, when weather conditions are right, snout butterflies, they stream north out of the desert southwest looking for, I don't know, probably mates and food. But what monarchs undertake long distance migrations also, but what makes the monarchs unique among butterflies is that their migrations have two features. Number one, they fly longer distances than just about any other butterfly. And number two, they fly, their migrations are bidirectional. So monarchs will fly south at the end of the summer and into the autumn, and then they fly north again in the spring. Yes, different generations, but butterflies and other insects, when they fly in one direction, they stay in that one direction, right? That's right. Yes, babies fly in, adults fly in one direction. That's right. Right. So actually some of the overwintering butterflies do end up flying north again, but they don't make it all the way north. Right? So we'll get to that in just a second. But the reason that butterflies migrate is that, unlike other insects and other butterflies that live in temperate areas, they cannot survive extended periods of freezing temperatures. So they have to fly south to overwinter at special roost sites. And in the spring, the overwintering monarchs begin flying north again back towards their breeding range. They'll go as far as they can, and then they will lay eggs and die, and then their offspring continue migrating north again. So it takes 2 generations to get from the overwintering areas back up to the northern parts of their range. The monarch butterfly is the only butterfly to make a long distance 2-way migration like that, from the northern part of their range down to the southernmost overwintering parts of the range. That's a trip of almost 5,000 kilometers. They don't all make it 5,000 kilometers. Most of them will stop and lay eggs along the way, and then their caterpillars, when they grow up, they continue migrating south again. Monarch butterflies east of the Rocky Mountains generally fly to overwintering sites in the mountains of central Mexico, in the states of Michoacan and Mexico. And monarchs west of the Rocky Mountains typically overwinter along the California coast, from northern California down into Baja. What's really interesting is that there's a lepidopterist named Robert Pyle, who wrote a book about following monarchs along their migration, Western monarchs. And he discovered, and he had some clues based on some observations of amateur butterfly watchers, but he had discovered that some of the Western monarchs don't settle in California for the winter. They continue down into Mexico. And that is a radical departure from what people had previously thought. They thought everything west of the Rockies goes to California, everything east of the Rockies goes to Mexico, and it turns out it's not that simple. Many monarchs end up west of the Rockies, traveling down into Mexico themselves. Where in Mexico they end up is not at all clear. Maybe they continue all the way down to the mountains of central Mexico, along with their eastern brethren, but it's not at all clear. I don't know that there are any records of tagged monarchs from the west turning up in the mountains of central Mexico. Really, really, again, another one of those monarch mysteries. There's also a non-breeding population, or I'm sorry, a non-migratory population of monarchs in South Florida. They don't migrate at all, and some of the monarchs that are born on the East Coast migrate south down into Florida, and they overwinter there. So the majority of them end up in Mexico, but some of them end up in Florida. In the ones in Florida are the ones that migrate into Florida probably migrate back again in the spring, but I don't have specific information about that. So there is a connection between reproductive diapause, which is a fancy way of saying that they stop breeding during the winter time, and that's a seasonal state which is connected to their migratory behavior. And both the migration and the reproductive diapause are associated with decreasing daylight hours, fluctuating temperatures, and a decrease in the amount of nitrogen available in their host plants. So they are taking cues from the environment to stop breeding and start migrating. And we don't actually know very well exactly which of those cues are most important. another one of those mysteries. What's also a mystery is how they migrate from their birthplaces up north down to their overwintering sites in California and Mexico. It's very likely that they use the angle of the sun relative to the horizon to orient themselves, but that can't be the whole explanation because monarchs migrate on cloudy days. So it's really not clear how they get where they're going. They might also migrate using physical features to orient themselves along the landscape, especially rivers and mountain ranges that go north-south. Other cues probably exist. Maybe the Earth's magnetic field, like birds use to migrate, but we don't really know. So once they reach their overwintering grounds, they regularly congregate in two major regions, as we said, central Mexico and coastal California, as well as that population in South Florida. The California sites are usually wooded areas dominated by eucalyptus trees. And they're located, the eucalyptus trees, but also Monterey pines and Monterey cypresses. And they're located in sheltered bays, and sometimes sites are further inland. What's really unusual about this situation in California is eucalyptus trees are not native to California. Eucalyptus trees are native to Australia. And while monarchs in Australia quite possibly during eucalyptus, why they have chosen eucalyptus in California as for their overwintering, there's something about those eucalyptus trees that makes them attractive. Ordinarily, they'd be in the Monterey pines and Monterey cypresses. There must be something about the eucalyptus that's very similar to those conifer trees that makes them attractive. But what it is exactly, the mystery. What we do know is that they like sites that have moderate weather conditions. They like to be buffered and protected from extreme conditions during the winter. They don't want sites that get too cold for obvious reasons. They don't want sites that get too warm either, although that's not usually a problem. They don't like sites that get too much rain. They don't like sites that are too dry, right? They like it in the middle. It's the Goldilocks phenomenon there. They don't like strong winds either. There are more than 300 different aggregation sites that have been reported in California. Unfortunately, some of those sites are starting to disappear. And we'll talk about that a little bit. The eastern monarchs that overwinter in Mexico, typically, they really like forests dominated by Oyamel fir. And those are found in the Transvolcanic Mountains in central Mexico. It wasn't until 1975 that people discovered where exactly those monarchs were ending up in the wintertime. So a lepidopterist named Fred Urquhart, who's from Canada, he led a team that discovered the monarch overwintering sites. And again, that was in 1975. Since then, several more overwintering locations have been located. Many of them are now found within the monarch butterfly biosphere reserve in Mexico. Others are found outside the reserve. Throughout the winter, monarchs cluster together, covering whole tree trunks, whole branches, and initially they occupy many different local habitats. When they first get to Mexico, they're not ready to pack themselves into the fir forests yet. So they'll just kind of wander around a little bit, but by late November, that's when they all start to migrate up the mountains into the Oyamel fir forests. And that's where they'll stay until springtime. Before they disperse in the spring, many of them have become reproductive, and the colonies are often filled with mating pairs. And they migrate to specific overwintering sites because they require a particular set of environmental characteristics if they're going to survive the whole winter. And survival in Mexico depends on a delicate balance of micro and macro climatic factors. Macroclimate is, the climate throughout the whole region. Microclimate is the specific set of conditions created by the plants in their overwintering habitats. So they typically like areas with high humidity and relatively high temperatures for the winter. They don't like the temperatures to get anywhere below 3 degrees Celsius. They don't typically like it to get above 18 degrees Celsius either. They also like an intact forest. An intact forest as opposed to one that's been selectively logged. Intact forests are better because they form a denser canopy, and that means that rain doesn't penetrate the canopy to the same extent as it would if it were more open, and that helps keep them dry. It helps keep them from getting waterlogged and potentially frozen if the temperatures drop. So protects them from excessively wet and excessively cold temperatures. In addition, thin forests get colder at night because heat escapes more easily. So an intact forest is like an umbrella, keeping the rain off of them, as well as a blanket, keeping them from freezing. Recent computer modeling has shown that their preferred habitats all share 4 characteristics. Number 1, they like high elevation. Specifically above about 2,900 meters. They also like proximity to streams. So they like a source of groundwater there. They also like moderately steep slopes, which probably helps keep a lot of predators away. And the 4th characteristic is an orientation facing the south or southwest. So that's pretty easy to understand because that's the part of the mountain that gets the most sunlight throughout the day. Monarch butterflies begin to leave their overwintering sites in about mid-March, and they've usually all departed by the end of the month. And at that point, many of them have already mated, and both sexes leave the sites, migrate north, and they continue mating along the way. Recolonizing the northern ranges of their habitat occurs over 2 generations, as we mentioned earlier. The monarchs that overwinter in Mexico start flying north to repopulate the southern part of the US, and their offspring complete the journey back up to Canada and the northern parts of the US. That second generation recolonizes the entire northern breeding range, utilizing more northern milkweed species. And spring migratory routes are really hard to track because these butterflies are really small. We don't have good ways of tracking their entire migration. In the fall, they tend to follow set routes that we can study very easily. We can follow them more easily in the autumn. The spring migration, kind of like birds, is more dispersed, where they're just kind of, I don't know what exactly. They're not following a set route out of Mexico, like they were following a set route getting into Mexico. They also, in the fall, tend to form these big roosts during their migration, and they're more easy to spot. So monarchs have a very difficult life cycle. They have to find food, an adequate amount of food. They have to find mates. They have to find places to lay their eggs, and then the eggs have to avoid all kinds of threats. And then they have to migrate. And migration is really dangerous, especially when they're traveling these huge distances. So there are all kinds of threats to individual monarchs, and they add up quite a bit to threats to the entire species. So what are some of the threats that monarchs face? They've been declining in the recent past. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, who keeps track of these things, has listed the migratory populations of monarchs as endangered, especially the Western monarchs. They're listed as threatened in the provinces of Ontario and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has ruled that they're deserving of threatened status, but they haven't actually officially been put on the list because they feel that there are other species that are in worse shape than the monarchs and therefore they're more deserving of the limited conservation dollars that the U.S. government has. Milkweed plants contain a toxic compound called cardiac glycosides. And though caterpillars are able to tolerate those chemicals. And not only that, they're able to store those toxic chemicals inside their own bodies without being harmed by it, so that they become very distasteful and potentially even dangerous to predators. But there are a few predators that are able to tolerate those cardiac glycosides. So anybody know who did this to this monarch? This monarch was killed by a predator. And I know which predator it was because I saw it with my own eyes. Could be a bird. Any other possibilities you can think of? Probably not a cat. I don't know that cats will hunt butterflies necessarily. Oh, they'll kill them. They won't necessarily eat them. It does look like it was torn apart. A bat? That's a good guess. This happened during the day. So I know for a fact it wasn't a bat. What do you see there? That's right. Praying mantises are significant predators of monarch butterflies. Strictly speaking, this is not a praying mantis. This is a Chinese mantis, slightly different species. But go ahead, call it a praying mantis. I don't really care. But praying mantises are not particularly rare. Not around here, they're not. Not on Long Island. Nope. I've seen many of them. And I've seen many different ones going after monarchs. So when I first saw this butterfly in the bushes here, I thought, oh man, that's too bad. It looks like that monarch got tangled up in the bushes in a twig or something. And then I just kept looking at it and kept looking at it and kept looking at it. And all of a sudden that mantis just appeared in front of me. And remarkable camouflage there. They're just sitting there. They'll find a pupa or something. They'll find a butterfly that has just emerged from its chrysalis, and they don't fly for a few hours afterwards. They have to wait for their I circled the mantis. I don't know if you're able to see it from back there. There's the head right there. I think they basically just grab onto the wings and then bite them until they've eaten the juicy parts and they leave the wings. Yeah, they'll leave the wings. Mantises aren't the only predators, though. There are some birds that eat monarchs. They're able to tolerate the toxins that are contained inside them. On the left is a black-headed oriole. Those are found in Mexico, and they're able to identify the cardiac glycosides found within the monarchs. Not all monarchs have the same quantity of cardiac glycoside inside their bodies. So the orioles are able to taste which ones have less and which ones have more. They'll leave the ones that have more alone. I mean, by that time they've already killed them, but they won't eat them. They'll eat the ones that have less chemicals in them. Black-headed grosbeaks, like the one on the right, those live in the southwestern US. They have developed an insensitivity to secondary plant chemicals, including the cardiac glycosides found in milkweeds. So they're able to ingest monarchs, or at least a small quantity of monarch without getting sick. Of course, if they eat too many of them, then they do get sick, and then they have to take a break, wait for them to excrete the cardiac glycosides until they, and then they can eat some more. They eat monarchs for food, yeah. Another interesting phenomenon is found in Hawaii. Approximately 10% of the population of monarchs on the island of Oahu have this black and white color instead of black and orange. And it turns out there are black and white monarchs pretty much everywhere throughout their range, but nowhere do you find them more than on Oahu. Uh, and it's thought that because the white morph appeared in the 1960s on the island, right after the introduction of a couple of butterfly eating bird species, that those two things are related to one another. So the birds started eating monarchs, and the ones that had this accidental black and white color somehow have an advantage against the black and orange ones when they're trying to escape being eaten by these birds. There are a couple of possibilities about what gives them an advantage. One of them is maybe it's camouflage somehow. Camouflage against flowers, maybe camouflage against the sky, like if the sun's shining down, birds will have a hard time seeing them. It's also possible that the black and white coloration it fools the predators into thinking that these aren't butterflies they want to eat, right? So a lot of birds and other animals have their food preferences genetically programmed into their brains. And these birds perhaps are programmed to see black and orange and think that's what I want to eat. Black and white butterflies, they don't recognize as food and they'll leave them alone. Which one of these possibilities is true? Could be both, could be neither. We don't really know. Another monarch mystery. There are other bird species that eat monarchs. Mice in Mexico also eat a lot of monarchs, especially during the overwintering period. Many of them will get cold, they'll fall to the ground. The mice really just snap them up. In particular, the species called the black-eared mouse. I couldn't find a good picture of them, so I didn't post it, but the black-eared mouse eats a lot of monarchs too. There's considerable concern about monarch populations out west, especially. Butterflies that overwinter in California have declined by about 86% just in the last 4 years. And that was on top of a pretty steep population decline that's been happening for much longer than that. In the eastern US, things are only slightly better because overwintering butterflies have declined sharply in this half of the country. And really the only consolation is that there aren't that many monarchs that overwinter in the eastern US. But what exactly is causing that drop in populations? Turns out it's actually a lot of different things that add up. One of them is habitat loss. So monarchs need milkweeds to complete their life cycle. They need milkweeds to begin their life cycle. And unfortunately, many of the wild growing milkweeds out there are in agricultural fields. And those fields get sprayed with herbicide so that the milkweeds and other plants don't compete with the food crops. So farmers are killing a lot of milkweeds. There's been a decline in milkweed abundance between, in the last 20 years or so that has been correlated with drop in monarch butterfly populations. Basically what happens is farmers will spray their fields with glyphosate or other herbicides, excuse me, and they plant genetically modified herbicide resistant crops like soybeans and corn and things like that. Conservationists attribute the disappearance of milkweed to agricultural practices in the Midwest, where genetically modified seeds are bred to resist herbicides that are then used to kill milkweeds. The use of transgenic insecticidal crops probably also poses a risk to monarchs. So those are food plants, not just food plants, but these are crops that are genetically modified to produce their own pesticides. So things like corn and potatoes and soybeans and cotton have been bred to produce toxins that are ordinarily produced by certain species of bacteria. We're all talking about GMOs. There's a specific type of GMO crop that produces a toxin that is normally found in a bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis. So those are called BT crops, which is a specific type of GMO. And monarch butterflies don't eat those plants, but they're still threatened by the insecticidal capabilities of those plants. It's not 100% clear how, but the best guess is that corn, for example, is a wind pollinated plant. So they don't have bees and things flying around and carrying pollen from one plant to another. They wait for a gust of wind to come along and blow pollen all over the place. Those little microscopic pollen grains contain bits of that insecticide. So when those pollen grains blow around, some of them are going to land on plants that are being eaten by monarchs. Some of them are going to land on the monarchs themselves. So there is a correlation between proximity to agricultural fields planted with BT crops and a decline in monarch survival in the surrounding areas. Again, it's important to point out that the population decline of monarchs predates the use of transgenic crops, but it's certainly exacerbating the problem. Habitat loss is also a big problem for monarch populations. Much of their overwintering habitat in Mexico has been illegally logged. As of 2013, the forest extent in their overwintering areas in Mexico was at its lowest level ever. But protections that were put in place afterwards seem to be working. I don't know to what extent the forest is regrowing, but it certainly has stopped the decline. But again, that's inside the biosphere reserve. The areas outside are still being logged. Still a major problem. And even if that problem doesn't get any worse, there's another major problem that threatens their habitats, and that's climate change. And climate change affects monarchs in several different ways. First of all, it creates what's called a phenological mismatch between monarchs and their host plants. So when monarchs first arrive in the springtime, they're looking for food right away, right? They don't mate for maybe up to a week after they emerge as adults, and they need food. They need to build up reserves of energy before they can reproduce. So they're looking for flowers that they can drink nectar from. Adults drink nectar from lots of different flowers. But of course, they lay their eggs strictly on the milkweeds. But advancing temperatures or increasing temperatures causes them, it serves as a cue for them to emerge from pupation sooner. It's a signal to start migrating sooner. But when they arrive on when they arrive at their destination, there's not necessarily going to be any flowers for them, because flowers, their timing is more dependent on day length than it is on. So the date of arrival is advancing for the monarchs, but the flowering dates are staying the same. So they're essentially moving further and further away from their food sources. Warming temperatures also mean that butterflies will are at greater risk for drying out in the summertime. You know, increasing temperatures, increasing fire risk, big problem. Forest fires have really taken their toll on their overwintering habitats in California. So even if the fires don't happen during the winter, while they're there, they still burn down forests that they depend on for their survival in the wintertime. Makes things more difficult for them. Increasing heat, it turns out, also makes the milkweed plants start producing higher concentrations of the cardiac glycosides that can be harmful even to monarch butterflies that can tolerate the toxins at lower concentrations. So we got all these problems that are facing monarchs, and it can seem a little depressing. So you might be asking yourself, well, what can we do to help them? And obviously collective action by governments all over the region are necessary to help conserve monarchs. But that doesn't really help us a whole lot, doesn't give us much direction other than voting for people who care about these things. So what can we do as individuals to make life a little bit easier for monarch butterflies? Well, for one thing, you can consider donating to some conservation organizations that specifically focus on research about monarchs and advocate for conservation on their behalf. So there are a lot of different organizations like Monarch Watch and the Monarch Joint Venture, which specialize in monarchs, the Xerces Society, which focuses on invertebrates in general, but they have a monarch unit dedicated to research there. You can also consider taking part in community science. For example, the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, which is run out of the University of Minnesota, involves volunteers from all across North America and even in New Zealand. And that project started in 1997. And the idea is to collect long-term data about monarch caterpillars, their populations, and the habitats that they occupy. And the project focuses on monarch distribution and abundance during the breeding season. There's also a program called the International Monarch Monitoring Blitz, which takes place every year at the end of July and beginning of August. And if you're taking part, you report your sightings of monarchs, both the adults and the caterpillars, through an online data portal. You can also report your sightings to a nature app like iNaturalist, which is this app that allows you to identify different species of anything. And it creates this big data set of sightings from all over the world of every different species you can imagine, right? So scientists can use this user-generated data to help plan their research studies. Monarch Watch also sponsors a tagging program ever since 1992 to help understand the dynamics of the monarch's fall migration through mark and recapture. Tagging was originally used by Fred Urquhart, who we mentioned before, was the one who helped discover their overwintering populations in Mexico. And the program reveals a lot of information about the origins of monarchs, how they reach Mexico, the timing and pace of their migration, mortality during migration, and changes in geographic distribution over time. It also shows that the probability of reaching Mexico is related to geographic location, the size of the butterfly, and the date that that butterfly was observed. I just started doing this last year. I do a lot of community science projects in my spare time. And this one was one I took on last year. And it's amazing, absolutely amazing. I wanted to get out there and start earlier this year and tag even more monarchs. But the trouble is that I moved over this, in the spring and somehow misplaced my tagging kit. So I haven't been able to do it. I ordered more, but I'm still waiting for them to arrive. That's a very good question. Yes, how do you tag a butterfly? It's not as difficult as it seems. My technique was I'm not good enough at swinging the net that I can just grab them out of midair. I have to wait for them to land on a flower, and then I just bring the net down on top of the whole flower. And then I just have to grab the net very carefully at the bottom and slide it off gently. And then I have to reach in and just pinch the wings closed. And then I can pull it out. Again, very gently. And the tags look like this. They're little stickers. Yep. They're little stickers that have a unique number on them, letter number. There's also a URL here. So if you happen to find a monarch with a tag, you can go to that website. It says mwtag.org, stands for Monarch Watch. And you can report your sighting there. So really, a little bit, but again, if you're being very gentle, no, it doesn't hurt them. It's not a major problem. If you're doing it right. And it's really not that difficult. You just very carefully pinch the wings closed, bring it out, put the sticker on the wing, and then try to very gently open up the wings to see if it's a male or a female. Look for those black dots that we saw earlier, and let them go. The whole process takes about a minute. It's very quick. Oh, good question. This was not at Robert Moses, but it's not far away. This was at Heckscher Park. And I went there last year in the fall to do some birding, and I got out of the car, and all of a sudden I just see this river of monarchs headed towards me along the dune. And I thought, oh, well, grab my tagging kit out of the car, and then realized, no, it was in the other car. So I had to come back the next day and do some more tagging. And I ended up catching a whole bunch of them. It was really great, but it was pretty clear what the monarchs were doing. These were clearly migrating butterflies. And the reason they were all flying along the dunes in Heckscher Park was because of the flowers that were growing there, which you can kind of see here, these yellow flowers. Those are seaside goldenrods. Those are pretty much the last flowers that are left on Long Island in the month of October. So the butterflies were taking advantage of this last gasp resource as they were migrating. They were drinking nectar from those flowers. And it wasn't just the butterflies. There were lots of other pollinators there as well, but lots and lots of monarchs. This was in October. So one other really important thing you can do for monarchs is plant flowers, right? Rip out your lawn. Lawns are terrible. They are useless. Grass is useless to monarchs. Grass is useless to almost everything, except a few moth species. Plant flowers, plant lots of flowers, native flowers. They'll drink nectar from lots of different stuff, right? They really depend on the milkweeds, though, for breeding. So if you want to attract monarchs, plant lots of different species, plant variety, but make sure you've got some milkweeds there. They really depend on it. The caterpillars will only eat milkweed leaves. They won't eat anything else. And there's several different species of the genus Asclepias in the Northeast. There are three main species that you find around here. There's the common milkweed, which you see on the left. Those get about 5 feet tall. They're quite large. There's butterfly milkweed, which has these really nice bright orange flowers. Those attract all kinds of species, not just monarchs. There's also swamp milkweed, which grows in obviously more wet areas. These are common milkweeds right here. This is common milkweed right here. Yes. Right. Yeah, common milkweed is the most abundant milkweed on Long Island. And butterfly weed also very attractive. I don't know that the caterpillars are that attracted to the butterfly weed because it's kind of small. It only gets like knee high. The common milkweed has much larger leaves and much more, leaf area on it for the caterpillars. And as I mentioned earlier, for years, I was just absolutely dying to plant milkweeds in my yard. And I finally got around to it right before the pandemic started. And guess what? It worked. It worked really well. As soon as I transplanted the milkweeds into the ground, actually, not that exact moment. It actually took a few weeks before the transplanted milkweeds took off. But they just, all of a sudden, they shot up. And immediately after they shot up, that's when the butterflies arrived. All right, so that one you saw in the video earlier, that was really early in the season. And they're just there. They find it real quick. Down here, that's a bumblebee. Yeah. There were so many caterpillars on those milkweeds in my yard. By the end of the season, they had completely devoured all of those milkweeds. Every leaf, or almost every leaf, was completely gone. And I couldn't have been happier about it. That was there for them, not for me. They came back the next year. Milkweeds they're perennials, so they'll keep coming back. They won't flower until year number 3. They won't start producing seed pods until the 3rd year, but the monarchs show up immediately. They'll show up in year 1. They do, but it still comes back. Yeah. And it's not just monarchs that you're going to attract with your milkweeds. There are a lot of other insect species that are able to tolerate those cardiac glycosides. They all have something interesting in common. See if you can figure out what it is. These are large milkweed bugs. This is a small milkweed bug. These are milkweed tussock moth caterpillars. Look like shag carpeting from the 70s. We had a couch that kind of looked just like that. These are red milkweed bugs, and this is a blackened milkweed bug. So what do they all have in common, these insects? They all have the same color, basic color pattern, black and red or black and orange. So it turns out that this pattern is something called aposematic coloration, which serves as a warning signal to predators that I'm poisonous, don't eat me. That color combination and bright colors in general are a warning signal. Don't eat me, I'm dangerous. And when a set of species that all feed on the same plant and all have that same basic coloration to serve as warning signal, that's called Mullerian mimicry. So they're mimicking not each other, they're mimicking that color pattern, right? Because they all want the same predators to know that they're all poisonous in the same way. But there's another kind of mimicry called Batesian mimicry, which is what we call dishonest mimicry, where instead of advertising that you're poisonous, you're trying to trick the predator into thinking you're poisonous, when really you're not. So one of these butterflies is a monarch, and one of them is a viceroy butterfly. You know which one's which? Monarch is on the right. That's the viceroy. The viceroy is on the right, the monarch is on the left. You can tell it's a viceroy because of this black band that runs along the back of the wing there. Monarchs don't have that, only viceroys do. Viceroys are also a little bit smaller. Yes, they have 4 separate wings. Yeah, the viceroys are cheaters. They're trying to trick you into thinking that they're poisonous when really they're not. Or at least that's what most people think. There's actually an idea recently being put out there that viceroys really are toxic in some way. I'm not sure I buy it because they don't share that same toxicity. They don't eat milkweeds. The caterpillars eat poplars and willows and things like that, cottonwoods. They don't eat milkweeds, so they don't sequester the same toxins inside. And viceroys in the southern part of the country actually resemble another closely related species, a different member of the monarch genus. So why are they resembling queen butterflies in the south and monarchs in the north if they're not trying to trick predators into thinking that they're a member of that genus also? Again, I could be wrong. That's just my opinion. So last thing for today, again, I mentioned we have some milkweed seeds here available if you want to take them home. You can't just pop them in the ground and wait for them to sprout. It's actually a slightly more complicated process. They have to go through something called cold stratification, which means that they have to be put into deep freeze, or maybe not deep freeze. They have to experience a cold winter before they can germinate in the spring. So sometime in mid to late winter, you take your seeds, lay them out on a damp paper towel, slide that damp paper towel into a Ziploc bag, seal it up, and put it in the refrigerator for about 4 to 6 weeks. All right. So makes the seeds think that it's winter outside and that they're in the cold ground, but in fact, they're in the refrigerator. You take them out at the end of 4 to 6 weeks, and then you can plant them. What I did when I planted them was I started them off in trays instead of just popping them into the ground directly. It very well could work by doing that, but I got a head start. So I I don't remember if it was like late March, early April, I potted them up in trays, and that way I could control their environment a little bit better. On warm days, I could stick them outside in the sun. On cold days, I could bring them inside. And they germinated pretty quickly, I have to say. They germinated pretty quickly. They grow very slowly. They germinate quickly, but they grow slowly. And when they got big enough, like maybe May, I guess maybe mid to late May, I transplanted them into the ground. And for like a month, they didn't grow. They just stayed these little seedlings. And then after several weeks or a month of constant watering, all of a sudden they just shot up. And that's when the Monarchs arrived. So, as I mentioned before, they flower and seed only in year 3, but the Monarchs show up right away. So, it's complicated to plant milkweeds, but totally worth it. Totally worth it. I had just this whole Monarch garden, and I couldn't have been happier with it. And then we moved, and I don't have Monarchs at my house, at my new house now. So I'm definitely going to have to plant some more in the spring. I didn't. I think I used some compost. And that was it. But that's it. Plant them in spring, right? So don't plant them now. It's not going to work. Wait till spring, or at least wait till winter to start the process. And that's it. Thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure. If you're interested in insects and other arthropods in general, I have an Instagram account dedicated to ecology in general, but arthropods and insects specifically. I also lead field trips for the Huntington Oyster Bay Audubon Society, and our next field trip is coming up in a couple of weeks, and it's not a bird trip, it's a bug trip. We are looking for a very specific kind of moth that is found only in a few places around the Northeast, including the Long Island pine barrens. That's called the buck moth. They're very common down south, but in the north, they are only found at a few places: the Long Island pine barrens, the New Jersey pine barrens, and pine barrens in Massachusetts, as well as the Albany pine bush. And they're really cool. They come out as adults for 2 weeks every October, and then they're gone. So there's a very small window for you to go see these buck moths. But they're really, really pretty looking. They're black and white and orange, kind of like the Monarchs, but they're not poisonous. And we're going to go look for them in the Dwarf Pine Plains Preserve in West Hampton on, I think it's October 3rd, the first Sunday in October. So you can go on our website to look for it. I don't know that all the field trips have made it up onto the website yet. We've been having some trouble with that. But the newsletter should be there. So if you look for the newsletter section, that should be up there now. So once again, thank you very much for coming, and come help yourself to some milkweed seeds. That is my son, yeah. Yeah, we found a Monarch pupa, and we grabbed it, and we put it in a little container and let it pupate inside the house. And then that was the day we let it go. That's right. We didn't do that. I wanted to leave them for the new owners. I think they probably chopped them all down, but nope. Nope, you don't have to do that. No, it'll just wither. Yep, it'll disappear. You won't think about it, and then all of a sudden in May they'll just reappear. Pardon? how big I'm sorry. Um, as big as you want. Plant as many or as few as you want. I mean, plant them, a good 6 inches to a foot apart so that they've got lots of room to grow. Well, these seeds I got basically just by picking milkweed pods from wherever I found them. We used to have a community garden plot, in our old town, and there were milkweeds growing all over that garden. So we picked a whole bunch of them. I used to live in Huntington. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I would say anywhere between, January or February would be a good time to do that. Yep. Put them in the refrigerator. That's right. Anything else? All right. Thank you very much once again. It's been a pleasure.